It's often said, you can do anything if you put your mind to it. But is that really true? Take me, for instance. Do you think that if I really put my mind to it, could play in the NBA next season with LeBron James and Steph Curry? Could I really do that if I put my mind to it? You're probably thinking, not a chance. It's not possible. I'm too old. You know, if Michael Jordan didn't play in the NBA at 46, I'm sure I won't. Too old, out of shape. I'm short by NBA standards. I can't jump. Now, there is some truth to that statement, so I don't want to discourage anyone, especially the young people. If you put your mind to something, often you can accomplish that thing. But the truth is that some things are just too hard for us to do. We can think of Abraham and Sarah. For many years, they've tried to have a child without success. And now Abraham is 99 years old and Sarah is 80. And God says, you're going to have a son next year. What's their response? Well, in chapter 15, Abraham laughs. And now in chapter 18, Sarah laughs. Can you blame them, though? What God is promising is impossible. But in Genesis 18, the question is asked, is anything too hard for the Lord? What was too hard for Abraham and Sarah is not too hard for the Lord. So Genesis 18, the story begins with Abraham taking a nap by his tent. And when he opens his eyes, 3 men are standing in front of him. And the narrator has told us that the Lord, Yahweh, appeared to Abraham. But Abraham doesn't know what we know. He doesn't know that one of those 3 men is Yahweh, God. You might be thinking, does Yahweh look like a man? No, this is what we call, or at least theologians call, a theophany, a visible appearance of God. Another example of this is the burning bush, where God appeared to Moses in a burning bush. Of course, eventually, centuries later, God did become human as Jesus. But at this point, this is many, many years before that, God did not look like a man, but he appeared to Abraham as one of these 3 men. We're to assume, I think, that the other 2 are angels. But Abraham, again, he doesn't know this. Abraham begs the 3 men to stay for a while. He and Sarah, they prepare a very generous meal. They go all out for their guests. And then Abraham and the 3 men, they eat together. And it's interesting, throughout this scene, Abraham unwittingly treats the 3 men as he would if he had known their true identity. See that especially in verse 3, where Abraham says, "O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant." Now, the word Lord can be used as a title of respect, like sir, but it can also be used for God. And we know that many times in Scripture, it's said that a person found favor in God's sight. So it seems he doesn't at this point know who they are, but he's treating them as they really should be treated. At some point, I think he does realize who he's talking to, but it seems at first he doesn't. The writer of Hebrews is almost certainly thinking of Genesis 18 and maybe a couple of other Old Testament passages when he writes in chapter 13, verse 2, "Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares." Now, we probably won't ever have the honor of having God in our home like this for a meal. But we should remember what Jesus taught. Matthew 25. He said, "Truly, I say to you, as you did it to one of these, my brothers and sisters, you did it to me." So to feed a hungry child of God is to feed a hungry Jesus. And so there's perhaps a lesson in there for us in what Abraham and Sarah do. A lesson about hospitality. No matter who the person is, we are to be hospitable. Because to feed a hungry child of God is to feed a hungry Jesus. That's not the point of the story, but that's a lesson we can take from it. But continuing on with Genesis 18, Abraham is asked, "Where is Sarah?" There are many different hints throughout the story that maybe these three men are more than they seem. Here they seem to know Sarah's name. How do they know? This question is like the question God asked Adam and Eve when they were hiding in the trees of the garden. "Where are you?" God asked. Of course, God knew exactly where they were. And he knows where Sarah is. She's behind him, inside the tent. She's listening, she's eavesdropping, and God knows it. But I believe he asks, "Where is Sarah?" because he's about to say something that she will want to hear. He knows she's eavesdropping, so he wants to make sure that she hears what he's about to say. And at this point, the narrator, in verse 11, reminds us that Abraham and Sarah are old, advanced in years. We're also told that the way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. I think we probably all know what that means, except for maybe some of the children here. To have a child now, for Sarah, is physically impossible. So Sarah does what most women would do when they were given that promise. She laughs. Again, how can you blame her for laughing? And God says to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child and know, or now that I am old?'" And then God asks, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" The New Revised Standard Version says, "Is anything too wonderful for the Lord?" Of course, it's a rhetorical question. The answer is no. Nothing is too hard for God, for Yahweh. And he says in verse 14, "At the appointed time I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah will have a son." Now, Sarah denies laughing. She's afraid. She says, "I did not laugh." But God replies, "No, but you did laugh." And this seems to be a mild rebuke. I don't think he's being hard on Sarah, but he does say, "Yes, you did laugh." And I'm reading between the lines a little bit, but I think that perhaps God is gentle with Sarah because he knows her history. He knows that throughout her life, she's become accustomed to disappointment. And so I think her laughter is a laughter of hopelessness. Over the years, she's learned not to get her hopes up. After you face so many years of disappointment, never being able to have a child, eventually you learn just to not hope anymore so that you're not disappointed. So her laughter, I think, is really a laughter of hopelessness. It's not some sort of arrogant laugh and laughing at the foolishness of the promise, but really a laughter of hopelessness. But when we get to chapter 21, I know we're skipping over a few chapters, but over in chapter 21, we're told, the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God had spoken to him. The baby is a boy named Isaac. What does the name Isaac mean? It means he laughs. That's what Abraham did. He laughed when God told him he would have a son with Sarah. I think maybe Abraham didn't tell Sarah about that because she laughs when God gives her that promise like it was something she heard for the first time. I know sometimes some of us men like to keep things to ourselves and not share them with our wives. Maybe Abraham was like that, and so she hears this promise and she also laughs. And so Isaac has a fitting name. He laughs. In her joy, verse 6, Sarah says, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And so the laughter, as I said last time, the laughter has changed. It was once a laughter of doubt and hopelessness. It changed to a laughter of joy and amazement. I think the birth of Isaac should cause us to think about the birth of another miracle baby, another baby boy. Mary, a virgin, is told that she will soon give birth to a son, whom she will name Jesus. And she wonders in Luke chapter 1, how will this be? How is this possible? Really, this is impossible. But do you remember what the angel says to Mary? Luke chapter 1, verse 37. He says, nothing will be impossible with God. Does that sound familiar? It's actually the exact same thing that God said in Genesis 18. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Which means nothing is too hard for the Lord. Nothing is impossible with God. And so we go back to Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. God had told Abraham, in you all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. So by means of two impossible births, the birth of Isaac and the birth of Jesus, God has blessed the world. And all we can do today is laugh with a laugh of amazement at what God has done. Nothing is too hard for the Lord. Nothing will be impossible with God. The story of Isaac, the birth of Isaac, tells us how the nation of Israel came to be. Abraham, then Isaac, then Jacob, and then Jacob's 12 sons who become the 12 tribes of Israel. It's in the book of Genesis for that reason, but it also is in there to teach us something about God. That nothing is too difficult for him. And we could apply Sarah's story to our own lives. Maybe you've experienced disappointment like Sarah. Maybe it's the exact same thing. Unable because of health or circumstances, unable to have a child. Maybe it's that disappointment. Maybe it's something else in your life and you've become accustomed to disappointment. And of course, as Christians, we pray about these things and we say nothing is too difficult for God. And we want God to change our circumstances like he did eventually in the end for Sarah. Can God change our circumstances? He can. But we shouldn't claim Genesis 18:14 as a promise that he will. We shouldn't say, well, God did this for Sarah, so God is going to do this for me because nothing is too difficult, nothing's too hard, impossible for God. Just listen to what John Walton writes in his commentary on Genesis concerning Genesis 18:14. He writes, the rhetorical question of Genesis 18:14 does not present us with a promise to claim, but an attribute of God to embrace, a faith to aspire to, and a hope to sustain us. When we face difficult circumstances, we cannot claim this verse as confidence that God will change our circumstances. He is capable of changing any circumstances, but perhaps the hard thing that he will do is to help us to accept our circumstances and grow through them. I was thinking about this as a way of looking at this that perhaps is unique. But as I was thinking about this, I thought of Verna, who is going through a very, very difficult time right now, and she's aware that she doesn't have much time left. And I'm sure she prayed and has prayed that her circumstances would change. But they haven't changed. But what's more difficult for God to do? To do a miracle or to do such a work in her heart that she would be able to accept this and be a great example of courage in the face of death. I was visiting her on Friday, and she said something similar to the words of the song we sang a little while ago, where it talks about none of our pain being wasted. And it's some people, I think, say that, put on a show, but I think with Verna, it is a sincere thing. And God has done something wonderful in the midst of that terrible situation to be able to do something in her heart, that she would have such a testimony of courage and hope when there is so much at the same time disappointment. So let me read that last sentence once more, that God is capable of changing any circumstances, but perhaps the hard thing that he will do is to help us to accept our circumstances and grow through them. Walton goes on to say, we must be cautious that as we accept by faith that nothing is too hard for God, we do not begin to dictate to him which hard thing he must do. He tends to have things in mind that go far beyond what we are able to ask or even think. And sometimes he does things that we wouldn't ask for, but God can even do difficult things in those things we wouldn't have asked for. So Genesis 18:14 teaches us something about God. Nothing is too difficult. He can change any circumstance, but sometimes what he does is he helps us to grow through that difficult circumstance. He can do both. Nothing is too difficult for him. And so I don't discourage you from praying that God would change things, but also keep in mind that he might choose not to change their circumstance. And God knows us, and I think as he was gentle with Sarah in his rebuke of her laughter, that he knows our struggles. He is sympathetic with us. He is a God that can do anything. And he can even do the difficult thing of helping us through a great time of difficulty. And use us in such a way that maybe we would not have chosen, but it would have been the most effective way to bring glory to him.